We have come to our last exam. This is the final exam, but it's not final in that it's cumulative. It's only final as in this is the last hurrah, the last one. It covers only 3 chapters, so this is the least amount of information you've had to have for an exam. This is chapters 11, 14, and 15. Okay, 11, 14, and 15. So here we go. Things that you'll need to know. One of the things you need to know, and I pointed it out when we went over it last week, I believe, or a couple weeks ago, was you definitely need to know the difference between an informational report and an analytical report. Okay? An informational report and an analytical report. So just remember, for the most part, informational is just that. It is just basic information, you transferring knowledge about a topic or an event or whatever the case may be from you to whoever the audience is. Where as an analytical report, they're going to offer analysis, they're going to supply more data, they're even going to perhaps offer a recommendation to those that are there in the room. But that's not going to be the case with informational, okay? So know the difference between informational and analytical. So they're going to want you to know the difference both definition-wise, like can you define the two and find that in multiple choice, as well as you're going to have to do a little bit of application with that, okay, and say this is da-da-da. Would this be analytical or would this be informational, okay? We talked about the fact that when we write a business report, just like with anything that we've discussed in class over the last semester, you can choose from what we would call a direct pattern or an indirect pattern. If readers are very knowledgeable about the topic, then you should feel free to use a direct pattern. If they are not knowledgeable about the topic, then you may want to do the difference. So we use a direct pattern of organization, getting things outlined when readers are familiar with the topic. We're going to use the indirect pattern of organization when they're unfamiliar with it and when they need to be educated. We can use what we call a formal style or an informal style when writing a business report. If our goal is to show objectivity, if our goal is to show authority, if our goal is to show that we're impartial, then we want to lean towards what kind? Formal. So if our goal is to be objective, we're trying to show authority, we're trying to be impartial, we're going to want to go with a more of a formal style of business report. We have talked about different formats of writing that we like to keep within the organization, and then different formats of writing that are okay to go outside of the organization. What are some of the things? Now, digital format, would that stay in or out or both? Both. What about letters? In or out or both? Out. What about memo format? In or out or both? In. Okay. So need to keep that in mind. You'll have a couple of questions about what goes in and what goes out. Visual representations of information. We had a specific assignment about that. What do we call those? I gave you this question already because I know it always stumps you guys, but I don't know why. Claire. Okay, so we did an assignment about visual representations of data. So the whole assignment, remember, was here's the situation. Would you use a pie chart? Would you use a bar graph? Would you use a line chart? Oh, now the light bulbs are. Okay, so what would we call those visual representations? What did we call them? They show information. They're graphics. Oh, I love it right there. There you go. Say it loud, radio voice. Say it loud.
Infographics.
There you go. All right, infographics. And then we talked about a couple of different things when writing a report that we need to make sure, that we know our purpose, that we know our scope. Actually, we didn't talk as much about that as you had that in your chapter assignment, that we know our scope, what all we're trying to include, where are our limitations. And in the book, it talks specifically about significance and knowing how to analyze the significance of your report, which is basically just forcing you to investigate why this topic is important. Why is it worth investigating? Okay, so that would be significance. All right, we talked a little bit about math. I'm just kidding. But we did talk about when we are facing a problem and we break that problem down into little sub-problems. What do we call that? Do you remember that? We look for different possible solutions for a main problem by breaking it down and factoring small problems all at each time. And we talked about in math, we do the same thing. You have a trinomial or a binomial, but in order to solve the equation, the overall equation, we have to what? We have to factor that binomial, or we have to factor that trinomial. You guys are pretty impressed right now with my algebra talking, huh? And so it's the same way. It's the same way with what we're talking about here with planning reports. Sometimes we have to what we call factor the problem. We got to break things into these little sub-problems in order to get an overall solution for the main problem. Okay, so what would you call if I said, I want you to go and do some research, and I want you to research using magazines, I want you to use pamphlets, I want you to use journals. I'm telling you it's okay to use, what would be an overreaching term for those things? No? Say it again? There you go, periodicals. And then we can also, very few of you like to go and just sit down in the library and research anymore, right? Because we have all this wonderful technology. And so we can also check Google, we can check Bing, we can check Yahoo search, and we can check Ask. All of these are what? Search engines or search tools, yes. We talked about ways to help our search when we're on the web. When we're getting on the web and we're getting ready to click in what we want to search, what were some of the things that helped us to get more information back and more accurate information about what we were actually trying to find out about? Quotation marks help. What else? We can leave out what? Prepositions, right? Articles, we can do that. We want to try to use more than just 2 keywords, maybe a few keywords. Use multiple search engines. We usually have our favorite, our go-to, so to speak, but it's good to use 2 or 3 different search engines to see if you get something different back. Quotation marks we already talked about that help us when searching on the web. One thing we didn't talk a lot about were wikis, blogs, but one thing about those are that they're very short-lived, and so we need to keep that in mind, okay? Blogs are very short-lived, wikis are very short-lived, so when researching and trying to use things like that, we need to keep that in mind. There were a couple terms that we talked about. We talked about authority, we talked about accuracy, we talked about content, and we talked about currency. So I want to just go over those definitions again for you so that it's back fresh in your mind, okay? Currency. When I am Googling information and research and I get an article that pops up or a journal article or whatever the case may be, I'm going to first check it for currency. That means I'm checking for what?
The date.
The date. How relevant is it? How up to date is it? What am I looking at? So I'm evaluating if it's up to date. So that's currency. If I'm evaluating its authority, what am I checking for? Who wrote it? What do they know about this topic? Are they a favorite in this topic? Do they do a lot of research in this topic? So I want to know exactly who did it. What about accuracy? If I'm checking for the accuracy of a website or an article, then what am I checking for? I can be double checking the information, but that's almost more content when I'm looking at the content. I'm looking more for, does it have spelling errors when I'm checking for accuracy? Does it have a lot of grammar? Because when I get on a website and there's tons of spelling errors, that is a big red flasher to me. They do not have accuracy, which means it probably isn't very accurate in content either. And so that's a big no-no for me when I start seeing that. Something you need, we didn't do a lot of talking about that, but I'll throw it out there. Survey questions. We talk about when we watch the video and being a good conversationalist, right? And being able to communicate. And one of the things when you're having a conversation is you do not want to ask questions that just let them say yes or no, right? And so, because you want them to talk, right? You want to get them. But if you're doing a survey, it's kind of the opposite of that. They're not able to. So you want to avoid open-ended questions. Open-ended questions are great for conversation, not so great for surveys, okay? I don't think you need that. you guys have learned, you might say the hard way this semester, through your APA project, the importance of making sure that you're documenting your sources, doing it the correct way, using APA. What are some reasons why we would use documentation? Why do we document our sources? Why do instructors even make you guys do that?
You're not plagiarizing.
To avoid plagiarism. You're not stealing someone else's work. What else? Giving credit where credit is due, right? So we're not taking someone else's work. It strengthens your argument. When people see that you have research behind you, it makes your argument stronger. It also helps your reader to save time. When they want to find out more information about something that you've put in your paper, if you have a site there and a source, they can go immediately to that source and find out more information. It's not this thing that they're researching what you've already researched. And it's good for instructing the reader. It's good for helping them to know how things are going. So all of those things help tremendously. Again, informational and analytical reports. What's the difference? Come back to that. Informational, it's just information, where analytical is going to offer recommendations, draw conclusions, and data. You got it. Know that when we do a concise overview of whether it's a specific issue, a problem, a proposal, we come in and we want to give all that information very brief and just tell them about the problem, very brief and just tell them about the proposal, very brief and tell them about the issue. We call those little mini segments a what? They do a lot of news things like they say, like the White House says we're going to do a what? A briefing. Did somebody say it back there? I think I heard it back there, yeah. So briefings are to give concise overviews. Didn't talk a ton about that. It is in your chapter, but just wanted to. When you're getting ready to present, like you guys just did, and we're getting ready to do an oral presentation, there are certain questions that you want to ask yourself about your audience. You want to ask yourself, what kind of measures do I have to take to make sure that they remember my main points, right? And we've talked about things that we do to help them remember our main points. We introduce the main points, then we talk about the main points, then we review the main points and summarize the main points. So there's things that we can do, but we ask ourselves, okay, first of all, what measurements with this particular audience am I going to have to take to really make sure they remember those main points? How will they receive this topic, right? We have to ask ourselves that, the audience. How is the audience going to feel about that? Are they going to be hostile? Are they going to understand what I'm talking about? We have to think about credibility. How will my audience, how can I earn respect from the audience? How can I build my credibility with them? So all of these are things that we do prior to an oral presentation. How many of you sat down and actually did that? Some of it just kind of comes, right? You know who you're dealing with, and so it's just kind of a felt thing. But you'll see when you start doing a lot more business presentations, specific things that you're asked to do, you'll have to really focus a little bit more about your specific audience and ask yourself those types of questions. Oral presentations are very redundant, and we do that on purpose, right? We purposely are very repetitive. And we put that intentionally in the organization of our oral presentations. We want to be repetitive. We want to be redundant. Not specific key points, our main points we want to be redundant about, not our specific ones. Credibility is a big deal. And so what are some ways that we can build that credibility with our audience? A couple of you did it today.
Letting them know your educational background.
Letting them know your educational background, letting them know your qualifications, your certifications. We heard about nursing today, and immediately the first person we heard speak identified the fact, I'm a nurse, okay? Or people that I've been working in logistics for this many years, or I work with this person and I know. And so they're building that credibility that is needed. When we are finished with an oral presentation, right, we want to make sure that there are a couple things that happen when we are focusing on our conclusion. What were some of the key things that you guys had to think about with your conclusion?
Recap.
We want to summarize, we want to recap. That's a great one. What else? We want something, we want them to have a specific memory, a specific takeaway from the whole thing. And what else? Remember, we don't want to leave the podium awkwardly. We want them to know we're done there, to know that it's over. We want to make sure that we build rapport with the audience. I think they keep hammering that, form a bond with the audience. We can do that through entertaining. We can do it through establishing a good, genuine connection. What is a when we're doing oral presentations, a lot of times students will use things like a simile or a metaphor or an analogy or even a personal anecdote. What's a personal anecdote for those that might not know what that is? Yeah, so a specific story that kind of connects with what? Yes, okay. You don't need that. I thought the visual aids today were great. Visual aids are not there to make your presentations longer. It's not there for you to read from. It's there to build your authority, to make you look better. It's there to help the audience to really understand. So it's just key points that will help the audience to glean exactly what they need to retain what information you're giving. It is there for you as a guide, but it's not there for you to read, okay? Handouts. When do we want to do our handouts? There was a group today that did it. We want to try to wait till the end. Now, I know the one group, I'm assuming the reason you passed out when you did because it was an actual printout of the slide and there was a lot on the slide, so I'm thinking you guys thought it would be better for them to have that in their hand and to look. Is that probably what you say? Yes, because that's what I was giving you the benefit of the doubt. But typically you should wait till the end of the presentation because it gives them, they zone out. If you'll notice immediately there was noise, people started just figuring out how to pass the papers down, which is usually very mechanical, but it can cause distraction. So be very careful with that. Do we want a lot of words on every slide? No, remember the little death by PowerPoint? We want to keep it to about how many bullets?
5?
About 6. That was pretty close. You wanted about 6. And once, it doesn't matter how many so we limit our bullets, but we can put as many words as we want on each bullet? No. So typically we try to follow the 6 by 6 rule. Not more than about 6 words on a bullet, not more than about 6. Some of you stretch that a little bit, but that's okay. Okay, the best way to present. A lot of people go back and forth and say, okay, should I memorize everything? Should I just wing it so it feels more natural? And the truth is you want something that's right in the middle of that. You want what we call extemporaneous speaking. And so part of it is memorized. But most of it is just you're guided by your slides and you just know your information. And you guys actually did tremendous on that today. What part should we memorize? Some people said quotes, some people said the facts, some people said, what did you say, Noe? Huh?
Topic, like what you're actually talking about.
The introduction, the very first sentence or two, that should be because you want to gain that credibility, you want to establish eye contact, you want to establish rapport, and that's very hard to do if you're looking away. And so the first sentence or two should always be memorized. After that, you go straight into just letting that guide and feeling free to kind of move around and go more extemporaneously, okay? Be careful. We talked a little bit about making calls. I'm not going to go through a lot of this because to me, a lot of the phone call information is just known. You guys know it. And we actually hit on a lot of that today because of their presentation. But, you know, if you're going to make a business call, it's good that you have some type of a little mini outline before you make the call, even if it's just notes on the back of a napkin or something, so you know what's going to be said in the conversation to keep you on point. When you answer the phone or answer someone else's phone, you always should identify yourself, your title if you have one, and obviously, like they said today in their presentation, be very polite. Hello, a greeting. A lot of companies have a very specific greeting that they want you to use, a memorized greeting that you use. We talked a little bit about voicemail in that we threw out the fact that voicemail can be your friend, especially if you get a lot of calls. And what do we talk about with that? That we could use voicemail to do what? You're getting there. Yeah. So you can do a good message so that it helps, but the fact of the matter is we can use voicemail to screen our calls. So we're not answering in every single person and we can use it. But we have to be careful. There is a limit to that. We talked about that. Again, good speakers are really good at building rapport with their audience. We've already talked about that. We talked in the last chapter about job boards. We talked about specific job boards, the bigger job boards. We talked about search engines, social networking. We've talked about all of these ways of hunting for a job. But we surprisingly also found out that even in this big, wonderful digital age, what is the still the most common and primary route to being hired? Person to person, personal networking. That's still probably the where most hiring is done. Personal networking and referrals, right? Just something about trusting in someone else that knows something about this person. You're able to kind of quantify what you have there. We talked about there's a lot of different ways you can learn about careers, right? So we talked about the importance of doing a career aptitude test. We talked about going to like the talent center that we have here at local colleges and investigating and learning. But what is probably the best way to truly find out if you're cut out for a career? Do an internship or shadow someone or call and at least talk to someone in that field and ask them questions. There's nothing like firsthand experience to really know and feel and get a feel for it. Remember I talked about the fact that I think I told you guys that I wanted to be a lawyer for all those years, and then looking back, I actually had to be in the courtroom and it wasn't pleasant. Like it was, I had to testify for someone and be a witness, and it was nerve-wracking, and I knew then I had made the right decision. And so I would have hated if I would have gone through all that law school and what have you. Same with being a vet. I went and I shadowed, and I loved animals, but there were a lot of components of being a vet that I did not like. And so that's something you just can't get unless you immerse yourself in it. Person-to-person contact is always going to be the best. We've already talked about that. Okay, let's talk a little bit about LinkedIn. So we didn't talk at length in the PowerPoint with it, but you guys had a lot in your chapter about it. So just a few things to know. In LinkedIn, and these guys mentioned it today, you have the ability to obviously create a profile. You can add a picture. There's all these wonderful things that you can do. It's great for researching companies. You can go in and find out through LinkedIn a lot about specific companies. It's good for you to get recruited by hiring companies. They'll pick you up. It's even a good way for you to kind of leverage your professional network, and kind of do that. LinkedIn is going to help with all of those things just by simply going in and creating a really good profile for yourself and a good LinkedIn account. But probably one of the best ways to use it is for you to find out information about others instead of for them to find out. You're there and you're a part, but if you'll use it as an active search engine, so to speak, to get out there and search for companies, that's really the best way that it can be used. Okay, moving on through what we finished up with last week, we talked a little bit about resumes. And remember, we talked about two specific types of resumes that are out there and that most people tend to utilize. One was chronological and one was functional. Okay, what's the difference?
Chronological goes from start to end, and then the functional is like tailored to the job.
There you go. So we want to tailor any resume to the specific job. No, anymore, you don't just have a generic. You want it each time to be kind of, a little bit customized. But chronological is about mostly work experience, and we list that in chronological order. So the focus on a chronological resume is generally your employment, okay? Functional is typically the opposite. If you've been in school a lot, if you've had a big break, we talked about that a lot last week, then we're gonna go more to a functional resume. So we don't highlight our employment. Instead, we highlight our qualifications, our education, those types of things. Now, functional resumes are really cool and really neat, but they cause a lot of suspicion in recruiters. They tend to like a chronological resume better, even though there are yucky things with chronological resumes and things like we were talking about last week. You're not really sure where to put some things, but they still favor most hiring firms and those looking to hire prefer a chronological resume. When, and they're gonna ask you, just like with the other, they're gonna ask you definitional, what's chronological, what's functional, and then they're gonna give you where you have to apply that. Here's a case, which would you use? Here's a case, which would you use, okay? Career objectives should be customized. We talked about even the possibility of moving more to what we called a summary, more about what I can do for you instead of what I'm looking for. We do have a summary a summary of qualification is not mandated. It's not required. You don't have to do one, but if you do one, you want it to be at the beginning of the resume. We want a nice cover letter if we're going to send a resume, especially if they specifically requested it. Not everybody needs one. A lot of the ATS programs you don't have to do a cover letter for, but if they specifically require or request a cover letter, then we want to make sure that's our chance to shine. That's one more place to really let our communication skills show to them. Just looking, making sure I'm not skipping through anything you might need. We talked about the fact that our education is important. If you have finished college, you do not, well, actually, it's not even finished. You can judge. Once you start attending college, they say you can drop high school. I personally prefer to leave it until I've obtained the degree. But once you've attended college, using the word attended loosely, does that mean attended and I finished, or attended? They say that you can drop that information. Also, you do not ever have to list all of your classes that you've ever taken in college, but can you list some? Yes, and specifically if there are skills you obtained in a specific course that will help you directly with a job that you're trying to get hired for. Everybody understands what listing jobs in chronological data is, right? We start with the most recent and we go backwards. References are important. No more do we just automatically put them on. We have them ready if anybody asks. Who are good people to look to and ask for a reference? Professors?
You've worked alongside somebody
If
professionally?
you have a colleague that you've worked with for quite a while, what else? Mm-hmm. People you've worked for before, as long as it wasn't an ugly thing when you left, but it was, you would want to. And you'd be surprised. People will just ask anybody because they're desperate. But you don't want to ask an instructor that you made a bad grade in, or you always cause problems. You don't want to ask a past employer if there was trouble there, and so you don't want to do that. We talked a little bit about the ATS systems and needing to make sure we get our resumes in what we call plain text, so it goes through correctly, don't have a bunch of images and a lot of different fonts and font styles. We also learned that it's really cool to be able to customize our resumes so we get more hits from those ATS, and we can do that through use the job title and put that in throughout your resume. Use really good nouns like that focus on the job title, that focus on your technical skills, and that focus on your certifications or experience. Really just, somebody brought up the importance of keywords, just really hammering with ATS tracking that you're using keywords there. We talked a little bit about e-portfolios. Do you remember what those are? So we start our own website, so to speak. We start our own web portfolio, and right now you should be putting things in that. Your resume's there, certifications, scan your certificates as you get them, things that you earn, awards that you earn, projects that you do that take a lot of time and you're really proud of. Put those types of things in there and put them in your e-portfolio. And I think we already hit everything. That's it, right? That's pretty much it in a nutshell.